And good evening, everyone. Now, I'm willing to bet you're all wondering, well, where's my better half? Color commentary, Wade Long. Quite frankly, I don't know. He's probably out doing his voodoo thing, but let's all hope he's okay. Let's hope he shows up. Well, tonight we have the honor of being guested by somebody that I've talked to for a few years, but it's actually pretty close to my heart. You see, for those of you who don't know, I've actually done the whole circuit when it comes to paranormal and occult investigating. And my first book, Defense of Occultism, was all about occult investigation. So you can imagine my surprise when I discovered this individual who's written books, who's done the circuit, practicing magician, occultist, an all-around nice guy. Tonight, we're going to be talking with occult investigator and author Bob Freeman about his exploits, his journey, how he got into it. And I'm sure you all want to know some of his personal secrets of keeping himself safe. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest of honor tonight, Mr. Bob Freeman. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Robert. Nice to be with you finally.
It's an honor to finally meet you, sir. And you know what? I guess two Roberts or two Bobs who are into the occult investigating who wear fedoras. What are the odds? The universe must be telling us something really funny.
We're living in the Matrix. So
there you go, man. Probably, for all I know, you're me in the future. I hope I'm as good looking when I'm your age. So enough of the jokes. I want to know, Mr. Freeman, what got you started? Why the occult investigator angle? What was it that got you interested in being a la John Constantine or Harry Dresden or things like that? What was it that pulled you into this practice?
To be honest, it happened when I was a child. I grew up on a 60-acre horse farm. We were in a little hollow along the banks of Turkey Creek, living in a trailer. This was my grandparents' farm. And less than a quarter mile from where we lived was this cemetery called Little Pipe Creek. And I was fascinated with monster movies and the occult. Right about that age, Carl Kolchak's Night Stalker had come out. So I was just obsessed with this stuff. Well, that cemetery, I'd always heard stories about. It being the kind of urban legend hotspot of paranormal activity. So as an 8-year-old child, I snuck out of the house and would go up and spend the night in the cemetery waiting for a ghost to appear. And I crawl up into the crook of this old oak tree that was in the center of the cemetery plot. And after, a couple of weeks doing this, finally an apparition appeared before me, manifesting as a kind of a mist coming out of the back corner of the cemetery and drifting towards me. Now, what made this cemetery interesting was that the legend around it centered around the gate, the cemetery gate. And when people approached the gate, it would open. And for women, they would approach the gate, it would swing wide, and they would just walk into the cemetery. Now, men, the gate would do the same, but as they started to cross that barrier, it would swing and strike them. So eventually they took that gate down because people were getting hurt by it. So that's where the whole legend around that place grew up. And, that's where I spent my formative years. Living on those, near those grounds. Now, to make the story even more strange, when I was a teenager, 13, my mother and her mother had a falling out. It was her farm that we were living on. So we moved into a nearby town called Converse, population of about 900 people. And we moved into this old derelict house and spent, several years kind of fixing it up to make it livable. But we learned not long after that house and the neighboring house had been a church and graveyard. Whoa. And the bodies were buried there, had been exhumed, and that's what established that Little Pipe Creek Cemetery. So my childhood ghost hunting occurred in a place where, purely by coincidence, we moved into the original place where those graves had come from. So, yeah, it was kind of just an odd bit of synchronicity, and something that made me realize that sometimes the forces in the universe take action that we're not always aware of.
Wow, that's amazing. So, like, after that, did you like actually choose a formal approach to your study of occultism and to occult investigation, or was it more like you found yourself just being synchronistically exposed to more and more hauntings or paranormal encounters? How did the adventure begin for you?
Well, of course, yeah. So when you're a child and you're stumbling into this stuff, you don't know what you're doing. You're just following whatever thread you happen upon. Mm-hmm. And luckily for me, the earliest literary reference that led me into the field was a book called Unseen Forces by Manly Palmer Hall.
Yeah, MP Hall, yeah.
Yeah, so what happened there was I had been staying with my paternal grandparents, and I was staying in the room that my great-grandmother used to sleep in. She had been moved to a nursing home. And so the room was filled with her things that she had brought up from Arkansas with her. Mm-hmm. And that's where my family's all from. And one night I'm going through, just kind of digging through her stuff, an old steamer trunk. And, it's underneath all these quilts and shawls and stuff. I find all these books on astrology, notebooks where she was keeping track of, the phases of the moon in conjunction with things that she was planting and all this. And then I find this book, Unseen Forces. I have it sitting here with me right now because I thought I might get a chance to show it off. So it's just like a little tract. It was published in 1946. And so I pull this book out and I'm reading it. And again, I'd always had a fascination with the occult, but I thought of it in terms of, basically, ghosts and hauntings and stuff, but something that came from horror movies and stuff like that. But reading this book made me realize that, these creatures were real, and that led me further down the path of trying to study and learn more about it. As far as formal training, I spent some time in my early college years. I worked with an occult lodge for a short time. Mm-hmm. I joined a coven for a very brief time. Mm-hmm. that had lineage with Maxine Sanders, so they were Alexandrian. Mm-hmm. And so that was the only formal work I did with any occult groups. After that, it was like study groups and things like that. Yeah. And but I learned a lot from them and from all the teachers that I've come across over the years.
If you don't mind me asking, like, aside from Manly P. Hall's work, which is really great stuff, I mean, like, I've always been a advocate of one of his most important books to me, which is Words to the Wise, which is really good for anybody who's going to get into the occult to prepare themselves from the crap that they could get into. Who are some of your original inspirations for getting into occult investigation? Like, aside from the shows, like, were you fascinated by like stuff like the X-Files or stuff like that? Some of the things that like made you say, I want to do this.
Sure, right. So, well, I'm older, right? So the X-Files kind of came late in life for me, right? So the early influences were like Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of, like Hans Holzer, and I was really invested in the Bermuda Triangle, Bigfoot, UFOs, all that intertwined. Anything high strangeness, I was interested in. So you had that. You also had there was a show called The Sixth Sense. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Not the movie with Bruce Willis. Mm-hmm. This was an actor named Collins, and he was an occult investigator. He had limited psychic abilities, and he solved murders and that sort of thing. It was a great show, and it played on as a part of Night Gallery for most people, where they would have seen it. Of course, I already mentioned Carl Kolchak, the Night Stalker, big influence. The Dark Shadows soap opera was a huge influence on me, and so leading from that, of course there was comics, like Doctor Strange and those sort of things that I really was invested in. As far as I was lucky that my local library, they had a pretty decent selection of occult books. So I read a lot of Richard Cavendish, Gerald
Black
Gardner,
Arts. Yeah,
Sybil Leek, and that led me to Aleister Crowley and Dion Fortune and those sort of things.
That's wonderful.
And I was just going to add that when I, because of my interest in all this, I was intent on becoming an anthropologist, an archaeologist, when I went to college, and Indiana Jones was big when I was in high school. So
it's about to be big again.
Yeah, right. So when I went to college and majored in anthropology, I got to pick a focus, and so my focus was witchcraft, magic, and religion. Wow. And I did a lot of independent study with a professor from the Philippines.
Whoa.
Flores Miser was her name. So that was she was a huge influence on me. She just gave me access to so much stuff that, coming from a small town in Indiana, growing up on a farm, she just opened up a whole world to me. So I had been kind of laser focused before that. And she just, she told me so many stories about her childhood and the folk tales that were a part and parcel of her growing up, that I saw these connections to rural Indiana and rural Arkansas, which, where my family was from. So I saw those connections with what, she was experiencing. And so I just had a much broader view of how the spirit world worked, and how interconnected it all was, and how similar it all was.
It's so funny because it's like, for a while, I actually had a TV show stint here in the Philippines, and I was an occult investigator. My name was Rob, short for Bob. So it's like, all right, the Matrix is playing its games, but this is what I wanted to ask you next. All right, Bob, around the mid-2000s, there was a huge boom of the whole ghost adventure stuff. Everybody was like on Discovery Channel. Guys are going around looking like SWAT guys with their tactical jackets, doing ghost hunts and stuff like that. But if somebody were to ask you, what differentiates you from these ghost adventure guys? How does an occult investigator differentiate from a psychic investigator, differentiate from a paranormal investigator?
Right, yeah, that's interesting. And again, because I formed, beyond what I did as a child when I had ghost hunting groups, I formed my first official group in 1983. So long before the fad of ghost hunting became a thing. So I was the only, other than me and my friends, we were the only ghost hunters we knew. So, I remember that in the mid-2000s, again, I explained that I live in a rural community, so we didn't have access to cable TV the way other people did. So I did not know ghost hunters existed, right, as a show. And one night we were out investigating in a place called Okefenokee, which is a place where settlers had come into this rural part of Indiana when it was a frontier, and people had been massacred there when they came into conflict with the natives. But anyway, so we're there investigating, and I run across these two gentlemen, pretty young, and they had what I would come to learn were K2 meters and an infrared camera. And I was unfamiliar with this equipment, and I was asking them questions about it, and they had explained that they had learned about it from this show called Ghost Hunters. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. I'll have to look into this. A week later, I was at another one of my favorite haunts, a place called Hobbitland. And I ran across a group of about 6 paranormal investigators. And they had the exact same equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So I spent a brief time kind of trying to learn this technology and find out if there was anything backing it up. And I came to the conclusion that most of those type of scientific, quote unquote, equipment is dodgy at best. So for me, I still pretty much hunt with the classic tools that I began with, in the early days. I used divining rods. I used pendulums, tarot cards in my investigations, to try and get a feel for an area. I still use analog tape when I try to capture EVP. So yeah, I just find that most of the equipment that you see on TV is there because it looks really good on TV.
Yep.
And I've come to get to know several of the investigators that you see, on the Travel Channel, and they've been very forthcoming about how when they go in and do an investigation, they do an investigation one way first, and then they break out the toys filming.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, Bob, because like here in the Philippines, when we would do investigations, we would segment it into one of 3 categories, okay? We'd have the psychic intuitive investigator. We'd send them in, no tools, no nothing, just feel it out, okay?
Right.
Then they get their assessment. Then we'd have the occult investigator. In other words, is there magic at play? Are there spells? Stuff like that, all right? They would use like what you would use, your tarot cards, banishing rituals, protections, and make sure that the team is safe. Third would be the toys, the paranormal investigators, where we want to know and the thing is, if there's like a resonance, if all of them agreed on one thing, okay, in other words, if the psychic investigator said there's a spirit here, I'm sensing it, and then the occult investigator says, you know what, the energy here is going up and down too, and we're feeling unsafe, and we sent in the guys with the tech, and the tech would be like, okay, EMF's going off the chart, and EVP's going crazy, and then we'd have more, how do I say, background to say that there is something genuinely here. That's when it would actually happen. So the next thing we wanted to ask you was, as an occult investigator, have you ever been pulled in a time to have to investigate something where it's more of malevolent forces, like a man casted a curse on someone, or they came across a demonic entity that was trying to possess them or something like that? Have you ever had that whole Malachi Martin experience, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I know what you mean. And yeah, it has happened. Those kind of cases are very rare. And sometimes you'll find, very real world reasons for why those things occur. And sometimes, obviously there's mental illness involved. I'll tell you that the strangest thing that happened for me, I was at a book signing once, and a woman approached me and she asked if I performed exorcisms. And I was like, well, on occasion, but I would need to know, the particulars. I need to sit down with the person that you feel may be possessed, and I would have to have permission to do this. So I ended up going to her home, and the person involved that she was concerned about refused to be a part of it. And he kind of got violent a little bit. I mean, not physically, but very, very animated. And so I just discussed this with the woman and explained to her that she should really look into a mental health professional first before she called me back in. And then the next day, unfortunately, that person, committed suicide. And it was very, I felt very guilty about it. Like I should have done more, but your hands are kind of tied in those situations. And it's a tricky, tricky path, to take with anything that is that malevolent, and that's just one example of, of a few that kind of stand out. And, it's the one that I dwell on the most, just because, I do feel guilt from it, that there was an instance where I may have been able to help, and I should have probably been a little more proactive than I was.
Well, my condolences to that. And you see, Bob, I have a question, because as a fellow investigator, I don't want to be paranoid, and I don't want to, stoke the flames of people being paranoid about things. But I have noticed that one reason that I personally backed off from investigations was because I was beginning to feel a backlash. Like there were certain entities that did not like what I was doing. They were like, for lack of a better word, back the fuck off or else. And, when I found out you were sick, I couldn't help but think, could this have been a backlash of all of the investigations you've done? Because if you've read the story, of example, of the exorcist Malachi Martin, they actually said that it were the demons that he was fighting against that took him. Same thing with M. Scott Peck, that if you've read his book, People of the Lie and Glimpses of the Devil, his first exorcism was a success. The second one was the end of him. And I've kind of observed in my own study that if you're going to go down this special forces route of the spiritual world, most special forces guys end up dead in the jungle. So I want to ask you, is this something that you've observed in your own career as an occult investigator, or is it all in our heads?
It's definitely not all in our heads. I've had instances where I've become physically ill in the presence of spirits. I've had things attach themselves and come home with me. I can remember one evening, I used to have a little writer's shack out beside my house. And it was very, very small space and impossible to enter it, without me knowing. And I'm sitting there, my back is to the door. I'm typing away on my laptop. And I'm writing a story about demonic forces, and I just got this kind of sickening wave that kind of came over me, and I thought I'm going to get sick, and I felt a hand set down on my shoulder, and just gently squeeze. And, immediately, I'm throwing up shields, I'm trying to figure out. And so I ended up having to, I realized that I had investigated a pretty dark place just like the week before. And I realized I had brought this thing home. So I had to, and I was pretty confident that it was an elemental. So I set a trap for it, bottled it, took it back to the place where it had come from and released it. And I felt better immediately. So, those kind of things are very real and drives me absolutely insane. I host a lot of paranormal investigations. There's a few spots that I have access to that I invite other investigators to come in and check out. And these people they'll sit there at the end of the night and they'll just, proclaim, you cannot come home with us. You have to stay here. You're not allowed. And I'm like, that's not going to do anything. It's like, it's just, they're so naive, I think. And that's one of my biggest problems with so many paranormal investigators is that it's sort of like a hobby, a pastime. Yeah. They're out there having fun and they don't understand that one of these days they're going to run up against something that they are ill prepared for.
I totally agree with you on that 100%. That book that I sent you years back, Defensive Occultism, that was one of the books that I really spent a good chunk of my life writing, because I wanted a manual for people who didn't know anything about it to have something to work with. And believe it or not, the amount of opposition that book went through was beyond the realm of coincidence, that it came to a point that I said, this book's going to fucking kill me.
Yeah, right.
And
it's a great book, by the way. I don't know if you remember the review I wrote about it at the time, but yeah, that was really enjoyed that, because I saw, a kindred spirit, that somebody who like had been in the trenches, understood, the dangers involved, and let's be honest, 99% of the actual cases, that you investigate are very benign.
mm-hmm.
And that's just the ones that are legit, so I don't want people to think that, at any moment, any place they go into, there might be some type of, preternatural intelligence waiting to, harm, because that's not the case. But it is possible. It is well within the realm of possibility. I mean, in the 40 years that I've been doing this, I've, a few dozen times I've come across such things. So,
Mm-hmm.
And that's, thousands of investigations, but yeah, people need to be prepared for that, and they need to be better educated, I feel. So
I totally agree with you on that, Bob, because like one thing, I don't know if you're into this, but one thing that's gaining a lot of popularity here in the Philippines is the practice of space clearing. Now, people like to do this because it's a lot of money. Like, oh, space clear my house, it's immediate $500. Okay. However, I tell people like this: if you're just cleaning stagnant energy, they think they go in with their singing bowls and sage and that's it. I'm space clearing. I said, well, that's if the place only has stagnant energy. If you actually come across a sentient, demonic, or how do I say, non-discarnate entity that's there, and you're bringing sage and singing bowls, you're just going to piss it off. And then when it gets pissed off and starts messing with your life, now what are you going to do? You see what I mean? And that's one thing that I tell people about, that I want to actually get your take on it. Like a lot of people say, oh, I space clear. I light incense, I say prayers, and I bring a singing bowl. It's like, that's like saying I can disarm a bomb because of YouTube. What's your take, Bob, on space clearing?
Now, I mean, you're absolutely right. In a very simple. I mean, the same thing is popular here. People come in and, like you said, a smudge stick, and they're walking around and they think that they're, all you're doing is you're instigating. If there's something darker there, as you said, all you're going to do is piss the thing off and amplify whatever activity is going to occur. So you need to investigate the space first and determine, okay, what's here, before you do any type of cleansing. And those people just aren't trained for that, because I don't think in most cases they necessarily believe what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or doing it for for the paycheck.
Yep.
And it's something simple that they can do. You go into any new age shop, well, there's all the tools. And there are a lot of people who, I keep using the word, but they're just naive to what actually might be there. If you have a new house construction, by all means, go ahead, do a nice little cleansing ceremony. But if you're moving into an older space, you need somebody that's going to sit down and really delve into what may or may not be there, especially if you're noticing activity.
Because I'll share with you one instance of a thing that I investigated. It really broke my heart. In this country, the spirits can get so malevolent that they can actually kill you. And a lot of them are nature spirits that are attached to just things like trees. And sometimes developers show no respect to the land, that they'll like cut down this ancient tree. Then they wonder why their lives turn to shit. You know what I mean? Like one case that I did that I consider a total failure was this man had his home, and there was a huge old mango tree in the center, and he just cut it down. And the next thing you know, his firstborn started getting sick of some weird illness and eventually died. And we didn't, and we were trying to intervene before it was too late, trying to make an offering to the spirits of the tree, saying, we're sorry we did this, it's our offering, but it was too late. It was really too late that eventually the person died. And I felt, just like you, I felt responsible for it. Really ate me up. But sometimes people that don't tend to underestimate how old and powerful these things are. Like one instance where there was this house I was at, and we had a physical paranormal encounter where something manifested in front of us. The owner of the house came to me screaming, saying, how can this house be haunted? It's a brand new house. I said, yes, ma'am. The house is new. The land is not. Right. So this leads me to ask you the next question. All of the New Age crap aside, if I said to you right now, I want to become an occult investigator, what are some essential skill sets that I would need to develop in order to become a successful occult investigator?
Well, beyond, just the book study, the most important, and I say this about anybody who investigates the paranormal, is that the skills that you need to hone are those that you're born with. You have to become observant. You have to recognize the world around you and take all that in and be able to recognize the subtle shifts that occur, because these things are not coming in with trumpets blaring most of the time. So, you're using your eyes, your ears, your sense of smell, even your sense of taste, all your senses, and you've got to hone those abilities, and as you do that, you'll begin to develop a sort of sixth sense. I'm not saying that you're going to become psychic, but I liken it to, like a spidey sense, right? Where you can feel when something's off.
Yeah.
You just get that sense inside you. Okay, there's something different here. And you'll, as you progress, you'll begin to able to tell, is this a dark energy? Is it a light energy? Is it,
Let me cut you off while I'm laughing. Because if you've been married long enough, and your wife is pissed and she hasn't said anything, you're well on your way. It's like, everybody's like, wait a minute, she's pissed. It's like, why are you pissed all of a sudden? You're well on your way. If you can pick up those senses in your significant other, the shift in energy, you're well on your way. Which reminds me of the next thing I wanted to ask. Let's say 3 books to get me started on occult investigation. What will your top 3 books be?
That's a great question. Probably the first one would be Psychic Self-Defense by Dion
Fortune.
Okay. But my goodness, there's so much good practical information in the book. You got to look past, she was writing in a different age. So there you have to look past, but definitely that would be the first one I would recommend to somebody.
I wish they would come out with like an abridged illustrated version. When like she's talking about certain things and they actually show illustrations, because that would be at the top of my book. What would your second book be, Bob?
Probably, you know what? I'm going to go with Unseen Forces by Manly Palmer Hall. Any MP Hall would be good. Secret Teachings, any of those. But Unseen Forces, for me, I guess because of when it hit me, was he delves into like, the Dweller at the Threshold and all the spirits that are beyond just simple, ghosts. You learn the whole cosmology of the spirit world. And I think that's really important. And so, yeah, it's a quick read and but so impactful. I think I'd put that as my second.
Your third would be?
You know what? Magic in Theory and Practice, Crowley.
Good.
It just, because it breaks down the magical world like no other book had. It's, again, of its time. and some people have trouble with that kind of language. Just I don't know why, but modern readers just can't seem to wrap their heads around that stuff anymore.
He's a bit too intellectualized the way he talks with that.
Right. Yeah, right. People have to spend so much time looking up, well, what does that word even mean? Because, language evolves and becomes, simplified, unfortunately. But yeah, I would put that as my third, because it does break down the magical world in a great way and makes it very practical. It is a great melding of science and faith.
Mm-hmm.
I think would speak to most people. Now there are Marco Visconti just came out with an edition, Aleister Crowley manual.
Yep, waiting for that one.
It's excellent. It's right on the shelf behind me. I thought it's so close to being the book. I described it as it was the book that Aleister Crowley set out to write when he wrote Magic and Theory and Practice. Mm-hmm. And mainly it's because it's very, it is very modern and it's very easy for people to wrap their heads around. Mm-hmm. Another guy I recommend highly is Jason Miller. I just read a couple of his books back to back, and he lays everything out beautifully for mm-hmm. somebody. So now I'm extending that to 6 books for people to read, right? So
we agree on the first one. Psychic Self-Defense is the paramount beginner of all of them. Now, if you want to read Psychic Self-Defense, you got to throw in another book of hers, which is Sane Occultism. And I like that because if you don't have your feet on the ground in occultism, you're gonna lose your shit. So number one would, of course, for me be Psychic Self-Defense, but secondly for me would be Hostage to the Devil by Malachi Martin, because if you're going the exorcist approach and dealing with demonic possession and stuff, that plus everything that spawned from it, like People of the Lie, Glimpses of the Devil, all that stuff, is like, if you're going track demonologist, demonic investigator, then that's the paramount book. And honestly, I used to have a phobia of demonic possession because I don't know what my parents were thinking. They made me watch The Exorcist when I was like 8, and I would lose it. It was a fear beyond anything.
I watched The Exorcist when I was 8 years old also. Right?
See what it did to us? It made us investigators. So anyhow, in order to challenge it, I said, I'm not going to let this fear of demonic possession control my life. So I'm going to study it in and out so I won't be afraid of it. And all I got from it was, okay, I understand it better, but I'm even more scared of it now. Fuck. And number 3 for me would be not Magic and Theory and Practice, but would be Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig, the late Donald Michael Craig. Because if you're going to be an occult investigator, what if you're dealing with another occultist, or what I call in my book a rogue occultist? What if your phenomenon is because somebody hexed Bob? We're going to need to know how to banish. We're going to need to know how to do the Rose Cross ritual. We're going to need to know how to do those basic rituals and phenomenon to keep us safe magically.
Yeah, Modern Magic was a huge influence on me when that came out, because I was right there. I think it was like maybe 86 or so when that dropped. So yeah, I would have been like 20 years old when that book came out. And yeah, it was a big influence, that and Donald Tyson's The New Magus.
Yeah, another good one.
Both of those books were just huge for me.
All right, so we're going to be going to the second segment of the show today. Thank you for the first part, getting to know you. The next one is what we call the John Stewart segment. This is basically where we ask you the current events of your practices. Like, where do you see it? Where do you see it going now? I have a special thing I'd like to ask before you share with it. Past couple of years, there's been kind of an uptick in occult and other forms of investigations, not from the magical occultist practice of like the rituals and stuff, but like even came to the point where the Vatican was opening the College of Exorcists again, meaning that they're like, okay, we need this. And you're seeing a lot more people get into occultism, magic, and stuff like that. So, Bob, I wanted to ask you, from your point of view, are we coming to it? Are we going to be like come into a time where you're like the Obi-Wan Kenobi and there will be a line of occult investigators out there and we're going to be fighting the darkness? Or are you kind of like the Batman saying that I'm holding the line for now so that the rest of you can live a peaceful life? What's your take on things? Because like you got the Warrens out there and the Conjuring is popular now and stuff like that. So what's your take on it all?
Well, there's definitely I see a lot more people embracing the occult in paranormal investigations now, which is good. I'm not always thrilled with the route they take in that, but I definitely see that we're in a sort of a sea change, and I think these are cycles that we go through, and we're in that. It's almost feeling like the 1970s again, right, where the occult was everywhere. And we're kind of having that again. And so as that happens, dark forces feel emboldened. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think definitely we're out there fighting the good fight. That's what we have to do, right? So I try to instruct people as best I can to kind of bring them into the fold and trying to lead them in the direction that I think that this next age is going to require of them, so that we don't leave anybody behind, right? So I mean, it can be dangerous out there, and it's amplifying. It really is. So.
Mm-hmm. Very much, because there's one thing I wanted to ask you as well about your own personal practices. But how important is the role and practice of magic in your practice as an occult investigator? Is it like a big chunk of it? Is it really not? If it's negligible, what is it to you?
Well, so when I was younger, my magical practice was a daily thing for me. As I've grown older, I realize everything you do is magic. Mm-hmm. And so I am less apt to do ritual now than in my younger days, because I feel more a part of the magic than I was before. So I do like a simple little prayer rite in the morning to start my day, just to get me grounded. And I do ritual when I feel it's needed, as opposed to every day. I've become more of an animist as I've gotten older, recognizing spirit in all things. And I think the work that I did as a younger man is just kind of, I'm infused with it now, and it's a part of me.
Speaking of magic, it brings me to my next question. Okay. I've heard differing views on people on how they address this topic, which is the practice of demonology, especially goetic demonology. That some people will say, oh, you got a demon in your house. Well, I'll summon a bigger demon and pull it out. Some occult investigators say that's fucking suicide. Don't do it. Other people say, well, that makes perfect sense. Now, with the accessibility of these lores coming out even more and more into the open, and with it being more and more watered down, meaning that it's so much easier to digest now, because I'm not going to mention any names, certain authors who they have ebooks on how to summon Belial in your bedroom. You know what I mean? Like Stephen Skinner would throw his hat off because wait a minute, that's a huge working. What are you thinking of? Versus this guy's oh, just write it on a piece of paper and Belial appears. So with that being said, I wanted to ask you on your take on demonology. Is it something that only the best of the best should even toy with, or is it nuclear radiation? Is it going to kill anybody who touches it? What's your take?
It's a weapon of mass destruction. Okay, right. So, it's the sort of thing that you need to spend a lot of time studying, and if this is what your intent is, right? Then yeah, study, practice, start small, very small. Don't dive into the deep end of the pool if you don't know how to swim, right? So in all things, begin at the beginning and work your way up. The problem that you run into is most people they want to just jump right to the last chapter. You know,
Yep.
they want to go right for the big boom, right? And it's the kind of thing that demands patience. And like I said, I don't do a daily practice, you know, like I did as a younger man.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, if I knew that I had to deal with, you know, a major demonic entity, I would not feel comfortable diving right into that. I would need some lead up. Now, if I didn't have a choice, I'll do it. But I would feel more comfortable if I had time to prepare and build up, you know, those muscles. I mean, you got muscle memory on all those things.
Yep.
But you get rusty, you know. It's so yeah, and I think people just take it a little too lightly these days. And like you said, you read books through like Weiser, Llewellyn. You know, these are typically pop culture occultism, and there's some really good authors that they have in their stable. But they also have some, and that's always been the case.
Yeah.
You know, you have really fantastic works that are kind of side by side. You know, like DJ Conway, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, those kind of authors that are there, kind of the fluffy bunny,
Mm-hmm.
you know, happy new age occultism. You know, it's great, and you know there's a place for that. But the more serious work, that's over here on the side, and
Which
get enough focus, I think.
Which brings me to my next question. As a researcher of over 40 years, has there ever been any books that were published that you said to yourself, "What the fuck are they thinking? This is gonna blow people up. This is dangerous." And if so, what books were these? I'm just curious.
Yeah, right. Because you want to go out and get them, right? Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about it, any of that, like the works of John Dee, right, are just fantastic. And I've got let's see, right behind me. Let's see. Let me pull this off here. Enochian Evocation.
Mm-hmm. Got that one too.
So, yep, great book, but it opens doorways to things that I think a lot of people aren't prepared for. Although I recommend it highly, but I mean there's all sorts of grimoires that are released that you think you're thankful that they're expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think I know where you're getting with this. I think I know where you're going. I don't want to mention any names because, I want to shout out to one of our previous guests, Denny, a Foolish Fish, who I call a bane to my credit cards because that guy put on the radar so many books that I never even knew existed that I'm like, I got to have these. And some of the stuff that I don't want to mention on the air, some of the stuff that I got my hands on, I were like, this is dangerous stuff, man. This is like...
Yeah, I love his little weekly recap every week, and I sit there, and I watch the video, and I'm taking notes. I'm like, yeah, I can't, there's no money in occult detecting, right? So I'm like, yeah, I'd love to have that. And luckily for me, I do book reviews, and I get a lot sent to me for free.
Lucky you.
Yeah, see, right. So but some of that stuff is, you're like, I'm thankful this is, out of the price range of your average teenager.
You don't want a craft scenario.
Yeah, it was very safe, right? So like when I was a teen and going into bookstores, the stuff that littered the shelves were like Raymond Buckland and
Silver Ravenwolf.
Those kind of later you had like Amber K, Silver Ravenwolf, very, a very gentle way into entering the occult realm. So definitely, you know, and I guess that's why you rarely saw Crowley on the shelves, you know, with that stuff. So you kind of had to hunt that down, right? So
you had to even know what it was to begin with. You had to know what you were looking for.
Right. And that was good because, you know, some of that stuff is darker. And that's not where you want to start your practice. That's why I think like books like Israel Regardie, when he released the Golden Dawn brick.
The brick.
That's just so, you know, because when I got my hands on that, it was like, oh my, this is incredible. You know, it's you know, and you see that that gentle progression that a lodge will lead in Ashburn as things become, you know, more difficult, more dangerous as you move along. And there should be more books like that. You mentioned Donald Michael Craig earlier. His books I'm always recommending to people because he was really good about, you know, here's level 1, here's your level 2.
Very systematized. Now, here's one thing I want to ask you. How many times did you have to do an investigation because of some kid who got himself a copy of the Necronomicon and was afraid that Cthulhu was coming to eat him? Has that ever happened to you?
It has, actually, yes. All right. So when I first actually started considering myself an occult detective, one night we were out at a little, you know, meeting place out near what's called the Mississinawa Reservoir, and I was there reading tarot for my friends, and you know, it was a very light-hearted situation. Well, from out of the woods, you know, a man approached, and it was a conservation officer, flashlight. And he starts reading us the Riot Act, you know, and you know, seeing the tarot cards. This was during the height of the satanic panic here in the States. Yeah. So immediately he has us on the defensive, and I start, you know, having to explain myself and what I was doing and what it was all about. And so he says, okay, would you want to see something strange? Sure. So me and my best friend follow him into the woods, and he takes us to this little clearing where, you know, there's a campfire that's spent, and there's a large pentagram inscribed on the ground, and there's a crucified cat.
Ooh.
And it's, you know, it's awful. He says, well, okay, explain this to me. Okay. So I investigated the scene for this guy and explained to him, look, these are kids, you know, they're here in the campfire. There's a melted cassette tape of Ozzy Osbourne, right? So I said, you know, these are what we would call self-styled Satanists. It's a bunch of kids. It's horrible what they did to this cat, but they're just, you know, they're messing with stuff they don't understand, and I wouldn't consider them serious occultists or anything. They're just kids out for a jolly, probably, you know, doing drugs, drinking and such. So he was, you know, he thanked me and everything because he was concerned was that there was, you know, a cult of some sort operating in his woods. A few weeks later, he got a hold of me again. And he said, hey, you really need to come out and see this place. You know, I'm really concerned. And there was this old abandoned house. We go inside, and you could tell that people had been using it as a party house. You know, beer cans, busted whiskey bottles, and the like. He leads me upstairs, rickety steps, really dangerous. Get up, and in one of the side bedrooms is this just the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen. And this was, the walls were literally covered in Enochian writing and sigils, and the floor had a very elaborate summoning circle and triangle. and there were spent candles all about. And I was like, okay, these people knew what they were doing. At the very least, they had laid out books and carefully constructed. I mean, and as soon as I approached that door, before I saw what was on the other side, I could feel that darkness, right? And so, like I said, it was frightening. I investigated the scene. I explained to him, what I could make out from it. Some stuff I didn't even recognize. I did not have a camera with me. I didn't take pictures. So we agreed to come back the next week. And when we did, the stairwell had collapsed and part of the floor, and they brought in a bulldozer and bulldozed the place down. And now it's a field. It's all plowed under by farmers. But that was, and so that's where I started working with authorities investigating these paranormal occurrences, these weird occult things. So and I was like, hey, look, I'm an occult detective. That's what I do now. So that's where it started. So
that's amazing. It kind of reminds me of this guy. I have a vague memory of it. Of this, they found a severed head somewhere in San Francisco, and then they called in this occult investigator and said that's like some sort of Santeria or Palo Mayombe, right? And in exactly so many number of days, you're going to find the body. And within the next couple of days, the body showed up. It's
right.
like, damn, man. And this is like, when you could call it like that, it's like, your stuff. Right. So that's just amazing. And did you ever find out what that was or who that was? Like, who was the guys behind it? Or?
Well, yeah, okay. So that CO's original concern that there was a like some sort of black magic group operating in that reservoir area, and I had dismissed it initially. Well, it turned out that was what was happening, and that's a whole nother long line of stories and the way I kind of came into conflict with them, and they made my life hell for a couple of summers there. Yeah, so they ended up moving away. The place, the house that we eventually found out where they were based out of, it burnt to the ground. But they had destroyed several of our what we considered sacred spots in that area.
So who were they? Were they Satanists? Were they what? What were they?
Well, they were definitely. It was definitely negative, but I think they, as far as I could tell, they started out in more traditional ceremonial magic, and then it was my belief, and I was never able to prove it, but I think they had evolved into Typhonian OTO, and they were trying to unleash those kind of Lovecraftian figures. So,
is there anywhere we could read about this? You have like a book you wrote about this? Because I'd love to get my hands on it.
I have not written it yet. I have all the notes compiled. That's on my list. I'm planning on releasing a sort of an occult detective manual, a handbook where I'm going to go into all those kind of stories. There was a guy named Lawrence of all things, who ran the oldest witchcraft museum in the United States. And he had come into contact with those people also. And he was the one who kind of warned us away from them. He said, you guys should stop going out to the reservoir, at least until we're able to deal with these people. And he gave us some protection to use. To a friend of mine, it was like an oil that he said that was derived from Crowley, that was like a protection from evil. And you would anoint yourself with it. And so this was in my friend's possession. And then he was killed in this really bizarre accident that I feel was connected somehow.
Did you ever find out what the motives of these guys were?
They were trying to open up a gate, right? And I think it stemmed from something that we had done when we were teenagers. We had done something similar. We had started an operation and it ended badly. And so shortly after that is when this group of older occultists kind of began operating in that area. And I think they were drawn there by the energy where we had mistakenly opened up a portal that we did not close properly. And I think they were attracted to that. So, it it ended badly for a few of us, but, in the end, we're still here and still operating.
I'd love to hear more about it. I mean, just let me know when it comes out, and line me up for a copy. So, all right, that pretty much concludes the next and the second segment of the show. Give you a round of applause for that one. The last one is Occultism. At the end of every show, Occultism is when the guest teaches us something and we take away with something. In other words, this is your opportunity to share your lifetime of knowledge with all the viewers and help us learn something straight from the master's mouth. It could be as complex or as simple as you want. Like Lon Milo Duquette, after a lifetime of me being his fan, taught me how to use wax paper on my tarot cards. Thank you, Lon, for that. So what do you got for us today, Bob?
All right, so what I want to do is unteach you something. All right. Too many people will set up safeguards around themselves. They put up shields to protect them from the spiritual energies outside of themselves. So what I want you to do is to lower those shields. I think we become so insulated that our connection to the spiritual is dampened by that. It's akin to, all right, so I read Jason Miller was talking about something very similar, and I like the analogy he made. He said, when you see a police officer, right, if he's going into a dangerous situation, he puts on his Kevlar vest, he might put on a Kevlar helmet, when he's going into a dangerous situation. But he's not wearing that protective gear every day, right? So like in every situation, so, because it's off-putting to people, right? So you want to be able to invite the public in and have them feel safe. I think the same thing is true in the occult. I think we spend so much time putting up shields around ourselves that it actually repels the spirits that we're seeking to interact with. And I think what you need to do instead is, what I do is I prepare protective energies, protective shielding, and I do this from my astral temple. I'm sure you're familiar with that work, right? So from that astral space, when I create it, I set, like, I guess what you would call a password. And so when I speak that password and I have it associated with a simple trinket, and I carry a box, right, in my gear, and I brought it along, and it's full of magical items that I have charged with energy. So one in particular, and I'll just dig in here and pull one out. This is a bracelet. I'll open it up here so I can hold it up.
It's beautiful.
Right? And each item represents a deity, right? So what I do is I charge each one of these medallions with a particular form of protection that I need. And then I'll carry this with me, like so, on an investigation. And then if I get into a situation where I need that protection, then I will just place my hand upon it, on the appropriate medallion, I'll say the password that's associated with the spell that I created, the protective energy that I've already established by doing an actual ritual, the full ritual, and then I imbue that into the item, and so I can conjure that up, and it immediately brings up the protective energies that I need, so that I don't have to do that beforehand and then repel things as I enter.
Mm-hmm.
So, a way to just instantly bring something up and protect yourself. So, yeah, these are all kind of things that I do, just little tricks of the trade that have helped me. And so, yeah, so lower your shields, allow the energy to come in, and don't put up the barrier until you have to.
Sounds great. Sounds great. All right, Bob. So that's a lot to take in for tonight. We really appreciate all that you shared with us. Do you have anything coming up? Books, releases, appearances, shows, anything you want to share with the crowd?
Sure. So if you want to find me online, I'm at occultdetective.com or Occult Detective on all my socials, Twitter, Instagram, and such. I had a book of fiction that released recently that is Landon Connor's Occult Detective. You see it's a big brick. It collects all the occult detective fiction that I've written in one nice handy place.
Can I cut you off on that? Wait, did you actually pepper that with some actual knowledge, or is it all purely fiction? Sometimes they do that. Like with a character, they'll share an actual spell. Did you do that, or is it purely fiction?
Oh no, it's littered with actual investigations that I've been on that are just kind of dialed up and made a little more fantastical for the reader. But yeah, people who've read my works, that are from this area, they recognize all the places. They recognize hey, I remember that. I was there. Yes, you were. I've changed the names to protect the guilty. So yeah, but it's just a bit of fun, and like they say, write what you know. So that's what I did here. If anybody would like to see me in person, I'll be appearing at Bell Mansion on, I believe, April 29th, and I'll be reading tarot cards and palms for the public.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, if you're in the Fort Wayne, Indiana area, come out and see me.
Amazing. So, is that book of yours available on Amazon or only on your website?
It is. It's available at Amazon. You can just do a search for either Landon Connors or Bob Freeman, and you'll find a link to it.
I'd love to read a copy, because one of my favorite fictions on occultism is actually Harry Dresden of the Dresden Files. I love him, and since what's his name, Jim Butcher, takes forever to come out with his next books, I'm always looking for something to fill the gap. But at least he is coming out with his next book, so now you gave me something to look forward to with your own work. So yeah, Bob, just want to say thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity of sharing war stories with a fellow Special Forces op. We're not going to cut you off the show yet, but we are going to end the show tonight. Just want to say, Wade, we miss you. Hope you're okay out there. And this is Magic.tv signing off for tonight. I'm going to hide you for a bit and send you right back. All right. Good night, everyone. And don't forget to tune in also to Mysterium After Dark on Spotify for your weekly dose of occult information.